And so I want to ask you this, because this is part of the encounter that he gets. The first part, and think about this for a second. Would that not be an amazing encounter for the God of the universe to take you outside and say, hey, look up at the heavens? And he does, and obviously it does something for him, because quite the perspective shift very quickly. But why do you think God used the sky and that as the object lesson in this moment? Any thoughts?
Well, one, it's obviously so big and so fast to show the enormity of the promise and how many his descendants are going to be. But also, I feel like it's sort of a sense of like, look at this, look at what all I've made, and don't you know that I'm God and I can do all of this and I can make this, and you can trust in me and have faith.
Yeah, absolutely. If I can do that, it's almost, yeah, like he's saying, hey, did you put those stars up there? Did you make this? Well, okay, no, you just walked out here and it was already there. Anybody else?
I think it's also infinite. You can't
Yeah.
see the end of it.
That's true.
You can't see everything there is. You look up, he says, I don't even know if you can even count these stars. There's so many, but you also can't see what's out. You don't even know what's out there. And I'm telling you to trust me. All this, it's a metaphor for what I can see down the road you can't see. Just
Yeah.
like you can't see the end of the sky. You think you can see it. You can see what I've allowed you to see, but I can see well beyond that.
Yeah, that's a great point, because again, if it doesn't fit in our minds, time, space, and how we see that, then it can exist, right? And even just wrapping your mind around the infinite, like you mentioned, part of God. Everything in our life, we get a washing machine and it dies. Like things have a beginning and having an end. The thought that God has always existed, always will. Try to wrap your mind around that. I mean, I'm still trying to process that. How can something have always been, yet have a beginning? Like, how does that happen? So, and that's the beauty of it. That's what makes him so awesome. Is you and I, we don't want to serve a God we can put in a box. We don't want to serve a God that we can make sense of everything. If we could, we would be like miniature gods. And I don't want to serve me. I don't want to serve a small version of God. I want to serve a God I can't understand. So I think that's what he is. He's trying to give him that infinite view. So here's the next thing. I don't really want you to answer it, but to think on it. I do want us to answer the third question. Is there a place where God takes you, as if it were maybe a place, a piece of nature, that has helped you to better see him? Do you have a place like that? Okay, the church. And how does that help you?
I mean, what you learn, what you hear, other
Yeah.
people's perspectives,
Yeah.
it really helps you understand.
Yeah. I love other people's perspectives. Being around, and y'all have probably experienced this too. We all have. Where you wake up even on a Sunday morning, maybe it's a Wednesday, or maybe even more so on a Wednesday night when you're pooped. It's been a hard day at work. You walk in here and you might even be frustrated by something, but you see somebody. You lock eyes with them, and maybe they're going through something, or you just have a conversation. It helps you. Like you might not be in the mood, and they help get you more in the mood. Sometimes that happens. All right? What about this one? Why do those kind of things, whether it's nature, whether it's church, whether it's something else, why do those places for us, like why does that shift a perspective that quickly? Because it did for him.
Well, so we just got a puppy, and I mean, she's absolutely crazy, but when I feel myself spiraling out of control, and obviously she's doing the same thing because she's a puppy, like just taking her out, especially at night when I can see all the stars.
Yeah. Like
there's something about that moment that it just totally grounds me, makes me realize I'm not the only one in the universe. This is the same sky that you can see,
Yeah.
From different perspectives all around the world. But it also it's a time for me to be. It's calm. Yeah. It's constant. Like you might hear an animal like a coyote howl in the distance or whatever, but it's just somebody. The God who created all of this created me. Yeah. Created all of these elements in my world, and even though it feels like it's spiraling out of control, it's not in His mind. Yeah.
Lauren, is that why you tell me to go outside and look up a lot? Okay. But I guess my encouragement to you is to find a place to do that. It could be investing more, like Dale mentioned, in the church. It could be going on a hike by yourself. It could be, going into the closet, praying, or being silent in the closet before praying. Find your place to look up, okay? So not only does he tell him, hey, to look up, and he feels a little bit better. Here's what's so awesome about God. He does this all throughout the Bible. This is a consistent theme, is he will give you a promise and give a promise, but here's what's different about our God is he gives a promise and a covenant. And that is amazing. And so we're going to look at this covenant. Before I do, this is what I wanted to kind of challenge you with. I forgot this. So let's go back a little bit. I think part of the reason why he also brings him outside is really just to let him and us reading this know there's a world outside of the four walls you see all the time. I think we need to know that in a lot of areas of life. When we just see what we're seeing on a daily basis, maybe it's our activities, our kids' activities, our jobs, our home, or how about this one, our perspective of how we see things. You get outside that tent, you look outside your four walls, then guess what happens to your perspective like his? It begins to change. When you get outside of the four walls that you've been living in, whatever it is that you've made walls that are your comfort, what you think, your perspective, whatever it is, you get outside of those, I'm telling you, things will start to change. Genesis 15. So I'm not going to have time to read through all this because we're already, I'm going to skip through it. So basically what happens is, and I remember, remember those Living Way books that you got in Sunday school? Like that was the things that we always used. And I can just visualize this one almost like it was on that felt board. But I don't know if they had felt board pieces that were animal parts cut in half. But he said, basically what I want you to do is get these different animals. And we can't talk about right now what all those different animals symbolize, but they did have meaning for Galatians and other times. But he said, get all these different animals. And I want you to what? Break them apart. Split them. All right? And then you're going to split them, and then what's going to happen? Right down the middle. You're going to walk down them, and you're going to hold two things. You're going to hold, what was it called? Something with smoke, something with fire. Where is it? Yeah, the smoking oven and the burning torch. Now you're like, that is so random. You just took me outside, gave me a promise. Is that not enough? What's awesome is he's saying, yes, I'll give you a promise, but a covenant is even better than a promise. They tie close together, but it's even better in the fact that the covenant was a picture of two things. The burning oven, the smoke, was a picture of the fact that, hey, I'm about to do something very soon. You're going to be wandering through the wilderness and need that cloud by day. I'm going to be that. It's 1 Kings. In 1 Kings 8, there was Shekinah, the king's glory. In the smoke, Mount Sinai had that smoke. He's saying, hey, I'm going to show myself. I'm going to help you through things. You got the fire. Fire at night that was leading them. He's giving all these different pictures. But there's also even deeper meaning in it, in the fact that he's showing them that it's a picture of him walking through those bodies that are split apart. And a lot of theologians believe that it's also a picture of how God basically did that with Jesus. Jesus' body was torn apart, and he walked down the middle as if it were and made a way for us. And the other part that some other people believe too is that the separation of those bodies that were laying there of animal parts is, if God's going to keep his end, we'll get to a unilateral covenant in just a second, but if we don't tie ourselves to that covenant, we're going to be like them. We're going to be like those dead animals. If we don't, and there's a difference here. If there's a difference in us keeping our part of the covenant and us tying ourselves to the covenant. And the reason I say that is, if it's up to you and I to keep our part in the covenant, what? We won't, okay? That's the difference between, like we've talked about, contracts and covenants. Contracts are, there's a stipulation. If you keep your end, then I'll keep my end. This is what is called a unilateral covenant, where you're making a covenant with somebody even if they don't keep their end all the time and they're not perfect at it. That's what he's doing. So he's saying, tie yourself to this. Connect yourself with this. And that's pretty incredible. So I wanted to point that out because I wanted to mention that the difference between a covenant and a promise is that while in a covenant both parties have clear obligations and responsibilities, a promise is something you may not be able to see. So he gives him, he's like, listen, I know I gave you a promise that you couldn't see, but I'm going to also not just give you a promise, I'm going to give you a covenant. Think about that today. What in life do we have right now as New Testament Christians that is a promise and a covenant? And do we have promises and covenants that we get to enjoy right now?
Being married.
Yeah. Yeah, we make promises, but it's a covenant. Yeah. Awesome. And remember what it says, that the whole point of marriage is to better understand who? Christ and his church, to understand that covenant. Anybody else? I mean, the promise, that when sending the Holy Spirit, right? And the covenant that he brought to help seal that and seal us with the Spirit. We could go on and on. Now we get to Genesis 18, okay? And Cam, if you don't mind reading this. Now that we know all that God just did in that interaction, now keep in mind they're still waiting. They're still waiting for that child. They're waiting for the answer to that promise. He had a covenant. He walked through the covenant promise, and he heard it from God. He had his perspective changed, but here we are, still some time later, nothing's happened until now.
And the Lord appeared to him by the oaks of Mamre, and he sat at the door of his tent in the heat of the day. He lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, 3 men were standing in front of him. And he saw them, he arose from the tent door to meet them, and bowed himself to the earth.
Okay, several things there. Very important that he meets him here. Mamre was a very important place for Abraham. It was a place where he had bought a plot of land and had a cave there. It was a place where right after they were, going to the promised land, one of the first places they resided, he made an altar to the Lord here. He was going to get buried here. He does get buried here eventually, and his son Isaac gets buried here. So a lot of very important things have happened and are happening here. And he also is still in a what? In a tent. The very place that he called him outside of, okay? He was sitting at the door of it, but it says this, there was 3 men who were standing in front of him. Now, this is one of the most talked about things. Who are these 3 men? Well, there's several thoughts. Some people believe it could have been the Trinity showing up. Now, the way I read it described, it would have been called what is a Christophany, which would have been, because we can't see God, and we wouldn't have been able to see the Spirit revealed yet, but it would have been a being with Jesus in like a angel form showing up to these men. That is a very highly mentioned idea, which if some people think, what's his name? Melchizedek? Wasn't that the guy that showed up and brought food out of nowhere and then he disappeared? Wasn't that him? Yeah. What is it, him? King of Salem. Yeah, King of Salem. Thank you. Yeah. So that some people believe that could have been the pre-incarnate Christ, because there's no record of him in like history that he just shows up out of nowhere. We don't know. There's a lot of thoughts there. It could have been that. The other thought is, if it was a Christ, pre-incarnate Christ showing up with the same 2 angels that were about to bring the smack down on Sodom and Gomorrah, that were there, that's another thought. Who knows? We don't know, but it is fun to kind of study that kind of thing. But here's what we do know. It was enough to get his attention, so that's what lends me to think that it was something different. It wasn't, he saw 3 men all the time. So for these 3 men, for him to I'm going to bow, you're not just going to bow to just any old 3 men. There must have been something different about this. We don't know what it is. And it says this, when he saw them, he ran from the tent door to meet them and bowed himself to the earth. And then it says, let a little water be brought and wash your feet and rest yourselves under the tree. So he's basically doing this. Hey, you stay there, all right, while I bring a morsel of bread that you can refresh yourself. And after that, you may pass on, since you have come to your servant. So they said, do as you have said. And Abraham went quickly into the tent to Sarah and said, quick, 3, whatever that is, of fine flour, knead it, and make cakes. It's kind of a picture of today, right? When company's coming, He's like, "Here, y'all stay there if you need to go on." He's like, "No, we got to have them inside. Hurry, get everything cleaned up, right?" You know, it's kind of like when you know company's coming, you like get all the things cleaned up off the floor. And like I told y'all what happened with us when someone's like, "Man, I'm impressed with 3 kids. Y'all's house is clean." And Cam said, "Oh, we just throw everything in the tub." You know, it's like one of those situations. They're, you know, hurrying up, trying to get all the things ready, trying to make it clean. You know, Sarah's working in the kitchen. And, you know, this was a big deal then, that the meals were a picture of fellowship, inviting someone into your home. This was a really big deal. And then it says this. Cam, will you read this one?
Then he took curds and milk and the calf that he had prepared and set it before them. And he stood by them under the tree while they ate. They said to him, "Where is Sarah, your wife?" And he said, "She's in the tent." The Lord said, "I will surely return to you about this time next year, and Sarah, your wife, shall have a son." And Sarah was listening at the tent door behind him.
All right. So this is kind of interesting. Who were they asking for? Sarah. Now, why is that a big deal now? Who had been asked for before? Or who got the promise about the son first? Who was mentioned specifically? Abraham. Abraham, you will have a son. Now it's saying Sarah. All right, they're about to approach her. Oh, I kind of spoiled it, sorry. They're about to ask Sarah and mention it to her. And I do think it's kind of a little bit humorous. She's in the tent, and he said, I'll be back here this time next year. And Sarah, you know, your wife will have a son. And it says this, Sarah was listening at the tent door behind him. It was kind of like, you know, her ear was, you know, to the canvas, listening to what was happening. And then it says this, "Now Abram and Sarah were old, advanced in years." And I love when the Bible does that. If y'all remember John the Baptist's mama and daddy, when they were, you know, approached by the angel, and he's like, "Hey, you know, she's going to have a baby." And he goes, "How can that be? I'm old and she's advanced." So anyway, I've always loved that. So if anybody, you know, you're old, guys, your wife is just advanced, okay? So just remember that. If you don't take anything from class tonight, your wife is advanced. All right. So this is where we get to the really interesting part that a lot of us remember and can maybe relate to, or in a certain way. The way of women had ceased to be with Sarah. So, and we'll talk about what that means. I think you're going to be able to connect the dots. So Sarah laughed to herself, saying, "After I am worn out and my Lord is old, shall I have pleasure?" The Lord said to Abraham, "Why did Sarah laugh and say, 'Shall I indeed bear a child now that I am old?'" So, a few funny things happening here. She's not saying this out loud. She's saying it in her mind. And God's like, "I heard that." Y'all remember when Jesus did this? With the Pharisees? Do you remember when, I think it was, what were the Pharisees thinking? If he knew what this kind of woman, or you know, this is sinners, tax collectors, right? And he's like, "Hey, I heard that." You know, it's a reminder, God hears everything, right? But part of the reason she's laughing is also because the way of women had ceased to be with Sarah. So this is saying like she was laughing at the idea of her having pleasure. This is talking sexually even, that she could even do this. So this shows us two things, and I never considered this till one of the commentaries brought it up. It was mentioning that she's thinking that the promise is still connected to what she's going to have to do. Does that make sense? What she's going to have to, it's going to be up to her to do something. And thought that was kind of interesting, never considered that before. And then the Lord said to Abraham, "Why did Sarah laugh?" I also think it's interesting that he could have said, "Sarah, why'd you laugh?" But he asked him. And part of my thought is maybe why he asked him is because, do you remember with the whole thing with Hagar? When she was kind of like pitching the idea, what did he do with it? I mean, sure, I guess that's fine. Like, he didn't take any leadership. I still think he's holding him accountable a little bit. And so she laughs in response to God's promise. Why do you think that is? Why do you think she laughs? Yeah. But do you think she heard about the covenant of walking down the middle of it? Yeah, she's seen a lot. Yeah.
Didn't see how it was possible.
She didn't see how it was possible.
Because she's thinking of what she can do.
Yeah.
She's not thinking, you know, of what he can do.
Mm-hmm. Any other thoughts?
We all operate off what we think we know,
Yeah.
and so she's limited by her physical ability.
Yeah. And, well, what we're going to read about her, which is, a faith that was incredible, yet we hear she was this. So we'll get to that in a second. So that's a good point. All right, next. Anybody else? Cool.
Like you were talking about wounds and scars earlier, this to her is already a scar. She's already
Well, that's a good point.
been through a fresh wound
Yeah.
in that time of her life, so now it's a scar, and you know it's beyond her.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. I think, that's a great point. Anybody else? All right, how about this next one? What is your own response to Sarah's doubtful laugh? Like, have you, you hear something and it, you think, I have faith in God. It's kind of like we talked about Sunday with Jonah. Remember the difference in believing in God and believing God? We can believe in God's promises, but do we believe God's promises? Those are two very different things. So here's back to kind of what Brandon mentioned in Addison too. Here's someone read Hebrews 11 though. This is known as Faith's what? Hall of Fame. All right, read this.
By faith, Sarah herself received power to conceive even when she was past the age, since she considered him faithful who had promised.
So if you just read that and didn't have Genesis like 12 through 18, what would you think about Sarah? She was full of faith all the time, right? So, kind of a odd question to ask is this: can you laugh and have faith?
Okay, God, if you say so.
Yeah, yeah,
I don't know how it's gonna happen, but.
yeah,
I think that's an aspect of free will. We can contemplate, we can consider, but in the end, we ultimately have faith, and that's how we make our decisions or the routes that we take.
yeah. All right. I like the free will aspect.
I think when she's laughing, what she's really doing is she's doubting. And I think that's a really important thing, because if you look at Gideon, who's also mentioned in Hebrews 11,
Oh yeah,
he also doubted.
yeah,
And if you look at Thomas, he also doubted.
yeah,
But all of them were faithful.
yeah. And Thomas doubted before Jesus. It's kind of even like I used to talk about this with our college students all the time, is in the church at university too, making our church an atmosphere where our kids, our college students, youth will come to us with their doubts. That we are a safe place to doubt. That we want you to come, and that may sound bizarre to some, but when you talk with them in that age and that stage of life, the doubts that they've had have never been addressed, and so it's suppressed. And so in the meantime, it's impacting how they view God. In the meantime, it's impacting the fact that they really don't have a relationship. They're trying to, when one of the most important things that could have happened for them is to experience what a godly relationship would be looking like with handling those doubts and things. So yeah, I do think that's a very important thing. Cindy?
I think too, it's amazing that God gave us so many examples of incredible people that showed the humanity and the imperfect person too,
Yeah.
to give us the example that, look, you can do this, but
Yeah.
you're going to struggle at times. Like
Yeah.
David and so many others that were mentioned before.
Yeah.
I think that's amazing, because otherwise we would not have the hope that when we fall all the time that we would not be able to get up and be that great.
That's right. Yeah, and I think that's why people love Hebrews. I would love to know like Amazon Kindle statistics. There's the word on like what is the most highlighted phrase in their records. It's got to be somewhere up there, Hebrews 11, because of that very reason. We get a lot of strength from that.
Could it be possible that her, after hearing the voice of God herself and that promise, brought true joy and laughter, not doubt?
Yeah, could be. I hadn't thought about that until just now. Good point.
I can't help but picture myself
myself in her shoes. And I gotta tell you, the first thing that goes through my mind is, how in the world, at this age, am I supposed to keep up with that little 2-year-old?
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
It's been a long time.
Yep. Hunter?
An interesting aspect too is that Abraham actually also laughs the chapter before.
Oh, that's right. And by the way, what's Isaac's name mean? Do you remember? Son of laughter. Yeah.
So Abraham presents with the same information, and this is just speculation on my part, but I wonder if part of the reason God's asking, or whoever it was is asking Abraham, why is your wife laughing? Is because like, if Abraham had just gotten this information that Sarah was still gonna have a child, you would think maybe he would have disclosed that to Sarah.
Yeah.
And so maybe it wouldn't have been as shocking to her to receive that news.
Oh, that's a good point. Oh, man. Okay. So, here we go. 14:15. Is anything too hard for the Lord? At the appointed time, I will return to you about this time next year. Another thing, just I was going to talk about it a little bit, don't have time to, but instead of just fulfilling it right then, they still said, like, you would think she's like, oh, good. Or at least, I'm laughing. Oh, yeah, it's going to still be next year. Like, really? Like a whole nother year, for her? Seriously, think about that's. Well, Hunter asked the question, when is menopause? Well, we'll let Hunter answer that. Just kidding. But no, like 12 more cycles? Am I going to have to go through that? Like, what is it? Sarah denied it, saying, I did not laugh, for she was afraid. But then this is so funny to me. He said, no, but you did laugh. Anyway, I just love that. A lot of humor in that. All right. What do these encounters teach us about God? I picked one. There was like 20 things I wanted to mention. I'm really going to pick just one tonight. Anything it teaches you, this encounter teaches you about God. Like, what makes you just feel good or challenged or reminded or maybe still have questions? Like, what is it that you feel and does this teach you about God?
It's not about what we can do, it's about what He can do through us.
Okay, not what we can do, but what He can do through us. Anybody else?
God's timing's perfect.
God's timing's perfect. Even when He gives you, hey, I'm doing something, oh, next year. And I know you've been waiting like 25 before that. All right?
He's very merciful, but it's not angry that she laughed and didn't have faith in him.
That's true. Yes. He showed a lot of mercy here when, He said, Lord, look. And then He, gives them even a covenant. Yeah. Anybody else?
You don't have to have perfect faith or be perfect to be faithful.
Yeah. And again, ties into the covenant. All right. What else?
We've talked about it a lot, but to mention again, there was so much that they both learned through these waiting periods that if it was granted immediately, they would have never encountered, they would have never had to reconcile, and that growth would not have occurred.
Yeah. That's a good point.
I think it's a further reminder that His plan is so complex, way more than we can even understand. You know, why it took so long, or why He used the demonstrations or the methods that He did.
Yeah.
Why didn't He just ask Sarah? Why did He say, why did she laugh?
Yeah. And why do I have to wait another year? Like, there's all these things. Yeah. All right. Well, here's the one, and because I'm wordy, too wordy sometimes, not most of the time. Here's the one that kind of stuck out to me about the meal that God enjoyed with Abraham. This passage helps us to see that 3 men came to the patriarch's home primarily for the benefit of Sarah, which is a little bit, to me, interesting. Yes, it's for both of them, but if you'll notice, most of the interaction, most of the attention is drawn towards Sarah. And, kind of a reminder of to us of, it's a picture of Galatians, and it's a picture here of what you're going to see in chapter 17 that we're not going to get to read. And here's the lessons, since we only have like 2 minutes left. Obstacles and opportunities are almost the same thing depending on your context. Think about, it was mentioned, maybe Cindy mentioned, or someone did, David earlier. You think about when he went to bring his brothers food while Goliath was taunting them. And they're like, man, y'all hear the way he's talking? And they were like, yeah, he's been doing that for like days. And you haven't done anything? Like, you got to say something. And he's like, well, I'll fight him. Well, that's cute, David. That they're like, this is Goliath. And he's like, well, this is an opportunity. See, it's an obstacle and an opportunity. But what was his context that was different than the brothers? What was David's context? Well, his context was what? A previous battle. They didn't know he had fought a lion and a bear, right? So his context was a previous victory. Does that make sense? So what if we can, I know I'm not good at remembering and celebrating the great things God did. My mind wants to go to things what God's not doing or what he needs to do now. But what if we could almost like wake up and celebrate, like think to celebrate the victories. And then if we start to learn to think and to train our minds and hearts to relish in the victories, to celebrate the victories and to thank God for them, that will frame the context of what could seem like an obstacle is also an opportunity. Number 2, under doesn't mean over. I'm planted, not buried. I have that written down in one of my Bibles. And whoever preached it, I can't remember if it was Randy or not, but when they mentioned that, the whole point was going back to 2 Corinthians 4, that the afflictions that we are going through are just momentary. They don't last forever. And it was the idea of that we're not buried here, we're planted here. That's what the Bible talks about even in Psalm 92, that we are planted people. And then here's the third thing I want us to encourage us with. Our wounds need oxygen. What hurt do you have about something, anything right now? It's going to have to get outside the 4 walls or it's just going to cycle. It's got to get outside those 4 walls. If you get outside the 4 walls, you'll start to see what's out, but also to see how those wounds can turn into scars. All right. Thank you all so much for all you mentioned in class. And sorry we had to hurry through the last part. Did want to mention about a few more things, but wouldn't have time. Thank you all.